Hi, everyone, and welcome to the information video for the URD PAC, which is the Understanding and Respecting Diversity Public Awareness Campaign. We're students at Kennesaw State University, and we've started this project as a part of our Human Sexuality course. Our purpose with this project is to promote deeper conversations around diversity, especially when it comes to sexuality, identity, and the ways in which we express who we are. We will cover some important terms you should know in order to understand this topic, and we'll also explore topics such as the intersectionality of sexual orientation, race, and gender. We will also talk about sex education and resources, as well as the lack of those resources. And lastly, we'll provide resources that you can use and ways that you can contribute to facilitating a more inclusive and supportive environment, no matter where you are. Throughout the course of this video, we'll also conduct an interview with students on campus because we want to incorporate a wide variety of opinions and experiences. We hope to provide content that informs, inspires, and engages. So join us on this journey as we open up dialogues on diversity and work toward building a more inclusive community.
Hi, I'm Xavier Peaks. The first thing that we will be discussing is sex education and resources. So, sex education here in the United States is typically taught starting in middle school. And believe it or not, it does have more benefits than it does cons, as being educated about sexuality can help you navigate your life in many ways. The CDC conducted a study, and some of the benefits that they found was the delay of initiation of sexual intercourse, which can show that someone understands and is practicing consent in sexual situations, having fewer sex partners, having fewer experiences of unprotected sex, increased use of protection during sex, specifically condoms, and last but not least, an improved academic performance, which is very, very important. Now, all of these benefits can help limit the contraction and spread of STDs, which no one wants to contract an STD or to spread an STD, hopefully. And these benefits also prevent dangerous sexual interactions from taking place. But despite these benefits, the Sexual Information and Education Council of the United States found that only 30 US states require some form of sex education by law in their public school systems. And interestingly enough, an even smaller figure, only 5 states, which is a tenth of the states in the United States of America, require comprehensive sex ed to be taught in schools. Now, 3 of these 5 states, California, Washington, and Oregon, require comprehensive sex education to be taught in all schools, which means that in the California, Washington, and Oregon public school system, there is a there there is a mandate that says there needs to be some form of comprehensive sex education in all schools. Now, the leftover 2 states, Colorado and Illinois, only requires only require the sexual education to be comprehensive if it is taught within schools. So, within the Colorado and Illinois public and private school system, sex education has to be comprehensive. But if it is taught outside of the public and private school system, then it does not have to be. Like I said earlier, only 30 states in the United States mandate some form of sexual education. This leaves out 20 states that may not teach sex education because they are not required to by law. In these 20 states, that is millions upon Americans who do not have any form of sex education. Like I said, this leaves millions of US citizens without some form of sex education. And this is dangerous, as some may not never learn about concepts such as gender, sexual identity, sexual orientation, and consent, which may lead to a lack of understanding about diverse populations. And from what the world has seen and from what I've seen, the less that the world and society understands a diverse population, the more room there is for ignorant and bigoted remarks to be aimed toward these populations, which is something that any diverse population or any population in general should not have to deal with. Now, to describe my personal experience, just because I've lived in the United States my whole life, been a Georgia resident my whole life. So I received a sexual education in middle school, but to be honest, I did not have a comprehensive sex education. And it wasn't until that I took this human sexuality course that I discovered that what they teach in middle school is very surface level knowledge. What I've learned in this human sexuality class, sex education encompasses many topics such as sexual orientation, gender identity, and reproductive rights, just to name a few. But despite this, like I said, in middle school, I was only taught to practice abstinence, which is the practice of abstaining from sex. And I was told in middle school that if I did not practice abstinence until marriage, which is not having sex until marriage, I would contract an STD, and that if you're married, you wouldn't contract an STD. And that that point that my teachers taught me in middle school is easily proved wrong in here because anyone can catch an STD even if they are having sexual relations with a committed partner such as a husband or a wife or a spouse. But me only learning this in middle school, it's limiting and it fails to address the broader aspects of sex education, such as understanding the various backgrounds that can make up one's sexual identity. And it's never taught about sexual identity, like I said. And I really did not know what it was until I researched it for myself and bettered my own sexual education. And taking this human sexuality class it has led me to have a better understanding of how one's sexual identity is important and how it needs to be expressed. But while I did talk about the benefits earlier, of course, I do have to highlight, sadly, the consequences of not having a good sexual education. And one of those consequences includes contracting and spreading STDs, and the other is not practicing safe sex. Now, like I said earlier, anyone can catch an STDs. STDs do not discriminate. The richest man in the world can catch an STD, and the poorest man in the world can catch an STD. STDs do not care who you are, it is a disease. And not being educated on STDs and having a good sexual education can help you can help you spread these diseases, which is not something that you want. But if a person does have extensive knowledge of sex, a good sexual education, and extensive knowledge on STDs, they are less likely to contract them because they have knowledge on safe sex practices and practices that can limit the spread and contraction of STDs. Furthermore, practicing safe sex is not just using condoms because, like I said earlier, engaging in non-safe sex is and not practicing safe sex is a con or is a consequence of not having a good sexual education. And when I talk about safe sex, I'm not just talking about condoms. I'm talking about the safety of everyone during sex, as it can also safe sex can also encompass the safety of others during sex, like I said. Additionally, understanding these topics, it does require an understanding of diversity and inclusion, as many people we meet throughout our lives will possess different orientations and preferences. Now, just to speak for myself, I grew up in a town where not everyone was comfortable expressing how they were comfortable expressing themselves sexually until high school, and I really didn't have an understanding of what the different sexual orientations are. So as I grew older and I did my research on it, I found to accept these people because, and I was taught to accept everybody, no matter their sexual orientation or their skin color or their gender, because they're people at the end of the day, and everyone will undergo different experiences than me, and they will also possess different sexual orientations than me. So I was taught that I need to accept these people as these people are people. And from there, I just learned in my life that not everyone that I will run into will have the same sexual orientation. Some person I talk to or run into may be gay, some may be straight, or some may be pansexual, or maybe even asexual. You just never know because the world is so vast and so unique. And the more you understand about diversity, and the more you promote inclusion, the better you can help the you can help these people fit into society, and maybe even help them understand diversity and promote inclusivity.
Sexual and reproductive health care is crucial for all people, including people who are a part of the LGBTQ plus community. Despite this, members of this community still face discrimination when it comes to sexual and reproductive health care. This includes services such as STI testing and treatment, contraception, pregnancy-related care, and gender-affirming care. Many legal policies claim to cover the rights of all people. However, it's important to note that sometimes they do not, and we need to have specific policies that address marginalized communities because they are more likely to be victims of social prejudice and discrimination. LGBTQ plus individuals, especially those belonging to sexual and gender minorities, are disproportionately affected by prejudice and discrimination. In healthcare settings, they face so much discrimination, stereotyping, or stigma from providers and/or professionals. A study done on sexual and gender minorities in relation to sexual and reproductive health care services. Some nations still have punitive laws that criminalize same-sex relationships as well as interracial relationships, which has resulted in low SRH, which is the abbreviation for sexual and reproductive health services. An uptake among SGM and societal stigma and exclusion of SGM, which is an abbreviation for sexual and gender minorities, from sexual and reproductive health services in these countries. The criminalization of same-sex relationships, combined with the stigma, creates an environment in which LGBTQ plus individuals are excluded and may not feel welcome. This results in poor health care outcomes and not as much education surrounding these very important topics, as well as increased vulnerability to mental health challenges or physiological conditions. Sexual health resources are just as important as sex education. And some examples of sexual health resources may include Planned Parenthood and clinics that test for STDs or STIs. Yes, these resources may still be available for everyone, but some may not feel comfortable approaching them or coming out and saying that they need help. A study conducted by the Center for American Progress found that more than 1 in 5 LGBTQIA plus adults reported postponing or avoiding medical care due to disrespect or discrimination or even fear of coming out, including more than 1 in 3 transgender or non-binary individuals. While discrimination is one of the main reasons people avoid healthcare, some people avoid it because they cannot afford it, and once again, it's not as accessible for all people.
Now we will cover some important terms that you need to know in order to be inclusive of various people's experiences. These are only a few of many important terms, however, for being truly inclusive and respecting diversity. First, we want to define the term assigned sex, which means the sex that doctors said a person was at birth based on their visible sex characteristics. This isn't always accurate because assigned sex is typically determined by external anatomy alone, which doesn't capture the complexity of biological sex. Factors like chromosomes, hormone levels, and internal reproductive organs can vary and sometimes don't align with the typical definitions of male or female. For this reason, the next term we'll be discussing is intersex. Intersex means that a person has a combination of male and female sex characteristics, such as a person with XX chromosomes having internal testes. Next, gender identity is an individual's own psychological perception/experience of being male, female, neither, both, or somewhere in between. Gender identity is an important part of individual identity, which is crucial to respect and validate each other's gender identity. Lastly, heterosexism is the assumption that everyone is heterosexual. which is attracted to others of the opposite sex, and that heterosexual attraction is normative. This belief is problematic because it reinforces the notion that heterosexuality is superior, which perpetrates unequal treatment and discrimination. Normalizing heterosexuality pressurizes individuals to conform to heterosexual norms, which then can cause them to suppress their identities. Along the lines of being inclusive of people's experiences, pronouns are a very important part of that inclusivity. Pronouns are the words that are used to refer to another person outside of their name. Common pronouns are he, him, she, her, and they, them. However, there are dozens of more uncommon pronouns that people may use, so if you are in a safe space, it is a good idea to ask people for their pronouns. Alternatively, introducing yourself with the pronouns that you use is a good idea to show that you're cultivating a safe space for diversity. Pronouns are often associated with transgender people, but not everyone who uses pronouns is transgender. Transgender is a term that means a person identifies as a gender different from their assigned sex. Along that topic, cisgender refers to individuals whose gender identity and expression are consistent with their sex.
Now we're going to talk about the topic of intersectionality. The term intersectionality was coined by Kimberly Crenshaw. She used the term to describe discrimination that couldn't adequately be understood through the concepts of race or gender alone. She focused particularly on the discrimination of Black women. She was a prominent civil rights advocate and led conversations surrounding critical race theory. She started her work in the 80s as discussions of feminism and anti-racism were arising. Her analysis stems from court cases where the experiences of Black women being discriminated against were overlooked because they didn't fit neatly into the existing legal categories, which treated race and gender as separate issues. In her paper, Demarginalizing the Intersection of Race and Sex, she argued that these intersections of identity led to unique forms of marginalization that were being ignored by the legal system. But although Crenshaw coined this important term, the idea was touched on previously by sociologist W.E.B. Du Bois, as he speculated that these different categories of identities could overlap. Also, a group of Black lesbian feminists theorized and addressed that these interlocking oppressions of sexism, racism, and heteronormativity could be intertwined to affect how individuals are treated based on their differing identities. In their 1970s organization, the Combahee River Collective. However, the roots of intersectionality go even further back, as Black feminists and women of color had long critiqued the limitations of mainstream feminist and civil rights movements for failing to address the compound oppressions they face. Scholars and activists like Sojourner Truth, who delivered her famous Ain't I a Woman speech in 1851, and the Combahee River Collective in the 1970s, highlighted how race, gender, and class interconnected in their struggles. Over time, intersectionality has become a widely recognized tool in social justice movements and academic disciplines, expanding to include their identities, such as sexuality, disability, and nationality.
Intersectionality is widely used as a critical tool in various fields to address complex forms of inequality, including social justice activism, academics, and policymaking. In activism, intersectionality helps movements recognize and combat overlapping systems of oppression, such as racism, sexism, homophobia, and ableism, which affect marginalized groups in multifaceted ways. For example, the Black Lives Matter movement incorporates intersectionality by recognizing that Black people, particularly queer and transgender individuals, often face compounded discrimination that requires a broader, more inclusive approach to justice. In academics, intersectionality has been integrated into disciplines like sociology, gender studies, and legal theory, offering a more comprehensive understanding of social inequalities. It allows researchers and scholars to analyze how identities such as race, class, gender, and ability interconnect to shape lived experiences. Policymakers also apply intersectional frameworks to create more inclusive laws and policies, acknowledging that individuals' experiences of inequality vary based on multiple factors. For instance, public health policies may be designed to consider how socioeconomic status, race, and gender collectively impact access to healthcare, leading to more equitable solutions.
Being aware of our intersecting identities can help us to understand how someone's experience might differ from ours. These identities consist of sexuality, race, gender, class, and even more, and they can be compounded to influence how an individual's mental health, relationships, and access to resources might be different from ours once again. By examining this lack of comprehensive sex education, I feel like that we see marginalized communities suffer most. Social norms and policies impact these communities regardless of what part of the country you're in, as we are in the South, and the way we function as a society and, throughout different government systems, whether it be in politics or the prison system, mass incarceration, we're going to see a lot of differences there in regard to intersecting identities than we would in the North, for example. In states with abstinence-only or non-inclusive sex education, students who identify as LGBTQ+ or are part of a minority background are less likely to receive an education that reflects or respects their experiences. This is invalidating, and it perpetuates a sense of isolation. It can result in poor health outcomes, and this means that most of the time, safer sex practices aren't being taught the way they should be. And understanding this and how multifaceted this issue is can harbor growth and more education for sex education and sex resources. So lastly, we are going to talk about different ways that you can be inclusive in your community and different resources that may be available to you also in your community, whether that be in your work community, in your school community. So yeah, there are so many ways in which somebody can be respectful and inclusive when interacting or talking with people who are sexually diverse. Some different resources include counseling. We have a counseling directory that provides ways to be inclusive. That consists of validating gender identities, breaking down stereotypes, encouraging self-acceptance, encouraging education and awareness, and supporting members of different communities. It's also important to foster an inclusive working and learning environment because you're going to be surrounded by people, especially when you go into your career, who are, different than you, members of the LGBTQIA plus community, people of color, marginalized communities, and your experience might differ from them. So it's important to be aware and make sure that all people feel comfortable and to be open-minded and make sure that you are making your peers feel comfortable. Most importantly, though, we must listen when members of marginalized communities speak out or tell their stories. We should listen and actively respond with understanding. Especially if you are in a position of power, specifically white people in America, it's very important that we let marginalized people speak, especially on issues in which they suffer most. They are going to give us the information that we need to do what we can to make change and to use our privilege. And that's just me speaking from a perspective of a white person. But practicing empathy helps to bridge gaps, and it creates a more welcoming and understanding environment. And once again, that's super important in the workplace, in school, and just when you're around your friends. We should take initiative to learn about issues affecting LGBTQIA plus individuals, ethnic minorities, and other marginalized groups. And it's just a way to show respect. And it's important to really hear and listen so we know how to further do our part. So we have quite a few resources available here on campus. To start, we have the LGBTQ plus Resource Center, which offers educational and social programs and resources for members of the LGBTQ plus community here on campus. We also have free counseling services that offer mental health support for, once again, any student who may be needing it or wanting to seek some extra help. Then we have the student affairs sector that offers testing help and health educator services, which also ties into sex education and sexual health. Now, to move on to some resources available online, we have some really great organizations. To start with the Trevor Project, they advocate for suicide prevention for LGBTQ plus youth. Once again, if you're needing any extra help, please reach out or take a look at the Trevor Project's website or social media handles. We have all our QR codes here to scan, so feel free to take a look. We also have the NAMI, which is support for anyone struggling with mental illness or needing some extra help. And lastly, we have the Human Rights Campaign, or the HRC, which helps to educate and inform anybody who might want to learn more about our current events or the political climate. And this also ties into safer sex practices and intersectionality. All of these resources can be accessed through the links provided or with the QR codes below them. Help is always available, and if you're ever needing it, these resources will always be here.
These are all of the references and sources that we use to complete this project. To conclude our video, we will now show an interview that we conducted with 2 students on campus where they speak about their background, beliefs, and experiences.
Go ahead. All right, I'll go first. My name's Matt. My pronouns are they, them. I am a junior, kind of. I'm a senior next semester, but I'm also a psych major, and I'm minoring in gender and women's studies. Something interesting about me, I have a twin sister.
I am Jupiter. My pronouns are they, them. I am a psych student as well. I'm a junior this year. And an interesting fact about me is that I help run one of our community-led organizations in the LGBTQ Resource Center.
I'll start with the first question then. Would you two say that you had access to comprehensive sex education?
I would say I think my school did probably an average level of education. I think in the 5th grade, I know that we had like a sex ed class, and then in middle school, I took another sex ed class. But I think high school was probably the only one where that wasn't I think that wasn't in the curriculum. But aside from that, that's probably like my path of it, I think.
I would say that mine's just about on par with theirs, just because I did take the like health course for high school online before actually entering high school so that I could get the credit before. But I think that there was pretty comprehensive coverage of like a lot of what goes on, although it was very like abstinence culture emphasized.
I was like, what would you say was missing, if there was anything, and like how did that impact like your just day-to-day life, like socially, stuff like that?
I think kind of on the opposite end, ours did talk a lot about like sex and how to do it like safely and be healthy with it. But I think that we still probably just didn't talk a lot about like, I guess just the specific like parts, you know, and just like the further anatomy on both ends of it. I guess there wasn't really much education to be had there, but I think that's the furthest I can say.
I think that in the sex education that I did have, that there was a lot of emphasis on just like sex as a means of conception and not as like really anything else. There wasn't really much talk about things like consent or the concept of like casual sex or premarital sex. So it was just a lot of like, this is a thing and you do it in your life if you want to have kids and that's it. So it wasn't something that impacted my day-to-day, but like after the fact of like being like, there was a lot missing. That was really what I was thinking about.
I would agree with what you said about like how it was seen kind of more as like the means of it, but I think also I forgot to include the day-to-day part. But I think for me, I do like I consider myself like knowledgeable, but it's because I think since then I've gone and like done actual research from that. But I don't think that it really impacted like how I viewed sex or anything like that. But I agree. I think that there should have been more like speak about consent, because I don't remember explicitly hearing that from the classes. I think, or at least I think middle school. I think they probably did, but elementary school, I don't think so.
I'm sorry, do you two think that sex education in public schools varies across the country? Like, for example, do you think it's different because we're in the South versus like where like a more northern or like I would guess like almost blue state in a way would have it, and like why do you think that?
Sorry.
I know that just like why do you think that is? If you think that.
I think that there is definitely like a disparity between different areas teaching sex ed. I know that my brother is a teacher, and the area that he's in, they have like very explicit means of like not being able to talk about like, you know, same-sex intercourse and stuff like that. And I feel like that's something that could be touched on, but it's just like outright not able to be talked about. And then sometimes I think specifics on like abortion and then other forms of like conception and like, you know, just stuff like that, like contraceptives. I don't think that they've really been able to talk about it. So I think that it kind of depends on, right? Yeah, it depends on the area, but I think it depends on the area because of the politics and the rules that are put in place.
I would say that I agree to that to a certain extent. I think that it also does depend on urbanization quite a bit, just because I think that in any metropolitan area, the sex ed is going to be better because there's more access to like reproductive health care. Although in more southern states, specifically in the Bible Belt, I would say much less accessible, especially in recent years, of course. But I think that the biggest difference that you see is in like the religious context to those teachings. Not that it's more or less accessible, but that the content is very different. And I can only speak to it so much because I've lived in Georgia my entire life, but had I asked somebody else who say like grew up in Michigan, I'm sure that I would get a different answer.
That makes sense. I would say, would you two say that you use your pronoun or use pronouns in your day-to-day life, and is being addressed by your specific pronouns important to you, and like why?
I believe I use it in my everyday life. I think most people use it in their everyday lives, but I know that for me, I think that being referred to as my pronouns, they definitely, it's important to me, you know, and it's why I insist upon itself, and like why I tell people like, hey, my pronouns are they, them, because it you know, the literal thing is that it gives me euphoria, being able to hear your gender euphoria. But I think that it also just kind of like affirms once more like who I am to other people, because it's important for me to know that like to other people, it's like if I say I'm they and they say that, and it's like, okay, cool, that's solidified.
So this is not one other question, but like, would you say it's almost like a respect concept?
I think so, because I think, I mean, it's the same if I were to call somebody like a name that they didn't choose, or like they didn't feel comfortable with, you know, because it's like I'm referring to you as something that is blatantly incorrect according to you, you know. So it's like whether it's name, pronoun, or anything else that you use to describe yourself, I think that there's an argument to be made there.
I'm also somebody who uses pronouns every day. Just because, I mean, for starters, grammatically,
You.
I, you, we, me, those are all pronouns, but in reference to gendered pronouns specifically, I use them all the time because I do talk to quite a lot of people. I talk to a variety of people who use different pronouns. For me personally, I would say that I don't emphasize the importance of being addressed by my preferred pronouns a ton, just because I fit into several different niches in a given day, between being in the classroom, being in the office at work, versus being around friends. Only one of those three main environments am I actually referred to by my preferred pronouns, not because I'm not respected, but because I don't assert it. And that's just like a personal choice of mine. And in the past like 6 months, I've changed my preferences like 2 or 3 times now, so can't really, yeah.
Okay, so we're gonna do our next topic. So my first question is, what are some of the biggest challenges that you all have faced related to your identity in terms of sexuality and gender?
Do you want to go first or should I?
I need a second, so.
Gotcha. I think for me personally, I think because I look a little bit like more masculine despite being like a non-binary person, I know that a lot of the times people will just kind of up front like assume that I'm like, you know, a male, or that I use he and pronouns. So I think a large part of my identity is feeling like I think I have to like assert myself as non-binary before people can like view me differently, because I know that if I don't, then I'm probably going to continue to be a man to them when I'm not. But I think that overall it's something to struggle with, yeah, but I think that day to day it probably doesn't, I wouldn't say that it causes me great pain, but it's more of like a nuisance that I'm aware of that I have to like deal with just going forward.
I kind of agree with that sentiment in a little bit of a different way, just because when I am getting to know somebody and I'm asserting to them like I'm outwardly masculine presenting, I was assigned female at birth, it's the whole thing of like this is typically true to like somebody who's outside of the community or is only a little bit involved or informed. They kind of do this thing where they overcompensate by affirming my masculinity in a way that I never asked, because all I say is that I'm masculine presenting, assigned female at birth, did not say that I was a trans man. At a point, yes, that was true. And medically, also true. I don't fit under that part of the umbrella. And that's something that I kind of have to like follow back up with some people, where it's like, hey, yeah, I mean, like, I get that you're doing this out of a place of good intentions, but like, I really prefer like more neutral terms, or you don't have to do all that. Like, I've been living like this for a long time. I'm okay. Same thing with my sexuality. I think that I do have a lot of like mannerisms that are typical for like a gay man, and I don't really ever try and hide those from people. And I think that for that reason, I do get addressed in a certain way where people are like, oh, you're a gay man. And that doesn't always feel good to hear, because on one hand, I'm being addressed as queer, which is who I am. But at the same time, I'm being boxed into this like characterization that doesn't align with me.
So the follow-up question to that was, do you all feel adequately represented in sex education or related discussions? But I think we already kind of know the answer to that, so I'm going to switch it up to how do you think you all could be better represented?
I think the obvious thing is just kind of like, well, I guess it's not that obvious, because I would say like normalize being able to like ask about, like, instead of assuming like, okay, I am looking at somebody, I think that they are a woman and I want to approach this woman. It's like, I think that it should be kind of more structured, as in like, okay, you should try and like see who this person is, like both like, you know, obviously on like a connection level, but also just identity wise, like, okay, what exactly, like, what's going on, you know, or something like that. But I think that it's, for me, I don't really know how I would go about like representing non-binary in kind of more of a sex ed standpoint. But I think that I'm just kind of at a loss at the moment.
I think there are ways that kind of are already being done to work towards this, and it's gonna sound like a reach when I say this, but even during like sex ed, I was introduced to like, oh, there's more than one ways to have sex. There's also like oral sex or whatever, and it's like, oh, okay, so there's multiple ways to do this thing. I think that the next step from there to be more inclusive is to say there can be two people who are assigned male at birth that can have sex, and two people who are assigned female at birth having sex. And I think that using that language specifically is going to be really helpful, because when you're looking at sex as like an anatomical exchange of bodies, because in the educational setting, that's really what it should be taught as. Mind you, like, I definitely think that there should be a thing like, for a lot of people, this is a love thing. For a lot of other people, it's not. That's a whole other thing. I think that talking about it as bodies and using the language of assigned female at birth and assigned male at birth, and also using that as an opportunity to talk about intersex bodies, really good way to introduce the idea of like, trans people also have sex, and they can have sex in ways that are like same sex, or like in a gay relationship, or in a way that would be considered straight, or whatever. There's a billion different combinations. Looking at it as like there are two different people and they can really just be whatever. It just depends on what they're working with. I think that would be a good approach.
I'll come back to that question. So my next question is going to be, how do you all navigate your identity in different spaces, such as school, family, or social settings? And I think you kind of already touched on that a bit.
I did, and I can expand on that a little bit, just because I do catch myself switching up how I interact. I work with students at this university every day of the week. So when I can identify somebody that's like outwardly feminine or female presenting, I'm going to kind of act more normal than I would if I were to see somebody that I'm seeing approach me and I perceive them as a little bit more masculine, or perhaps somebody that I assume to be straight. And those assumptions are more protective than they are anything, just because I do worry, and I think that at this day and age it's a little bit far for me to try and protect myself as much as I do, but I do kind of like change my mannerisms in speaking. I will deepen my voice depending on like if I'm talking to somebody who I perceive to be a man. I'm wanting to protect myself. So that's one thing. And then of course, like, I don't really correct people a lot, especially in work, and in class I'm not really spoken to that much, so not really a concern. But yeah.
Okay.
I think for me, I think the way that I kind of go about navigating through these spaces is that I believe I generally act the same regardless of where I am, aside from just like making sure that maybe I'm a little bit like more demure in certain moments. But I think like I know that at least when it comes to me being like out, or at least like outwardly presenting with other people and just kind of talking, I'm more out with my friends. They pretty much know like what my identity is, what name I go by. And then I think like in the class, I feel like that's a little bit different, just because it was really just this semester when I started to tell people like, I'm Jupiter, I use they, them pronouns, because before I would just stick with using my old name and my old pronouns as more of like a defensive like protection measure, because it is kind of a thing where it's like, even if there's this guy in this class, or like this person in my class who I think like is maybe chill, I don't want to immediately say like, hey, by the way, I'm non-binary, because that could, yes, it could positively like impact how they view me, but there's also a great chance of it negatively viewing that, or negatively viewing me, and changing their interactions, and then that could snowball into like the rest of the class in ways that I'm not sure of. But also, I don't think that that's always guaranteed to happen. But I think, yeah, it's difficult to really gauge where exactly you want to be fully out, or even a little bit out, just because you never really know where you can trust to like actually be yourself in a way, I think. But for the most part, I think going about it, just kind of staying the same person, but just different name and pronouns, I think that that's kind of how I've been. Yeah.
So my next question is going to be, how has coming to college changed your views on diversity, and then what specifically changed?
I think the area that I grew up, I also grew up in Georgia, and I've just lived here my whole life, but I think that coming to college, I noticed kind of immediately that the demographic was just different from where I grew up, because the area that I grew up was very predominantly white. So I kind of grew up in the South, and you're thinking like, okay, every area is pretty much going to be like 70% white and then 30% other, you know? And then I was also thinking in terms of like gender and sexuality, that it was pretty much the same, of just like 70% like cis and straight, and then the 30% other. But coming to campus, I think, or like being here, I've been able to see pretty immediately just like the literal variety of people that are on campus like consistently. So I think, I guess the specific thing that really changed for me is that the belief that an area can exist with a wide variety of people and like an expansive demographic, it was changed to me, the fact that that is something that could actually happen, and that it wasn't like an imagination thing, or just like something that happens in like different areas entirely, and they're like different states, different countries. It's here, you know, this is somewhere where like it's only an hour and a half away from where I actually live and grow up. So it changed kind of the view, I guess, on the population and just stuff like that for me.
I can so relate to that, actually.
It was a bit different for me, because where I grew up, I think it was my middle school that was noted, or like acknowledged as the most diverse middle school in the state.
Oh wow.
So I'm from an area that's widely mixed, and a lot of my neighbors were like first generation immigrants, and so because of that, I don't think that I held any particular expectations or reservations, for that matter, like going into college. What did definitely shock me was the variety of origin, as far as like having a conversation with somebody, meeting them, being like, oh, you're here, well, where did you come from, and seeing how that distance varies. That was really what struck me at first. And then being able to meet all the international students, I'm friends with a few international students here, which is an opportunity I've never had before. So things like that, and then also just the amount of LGBT people around me is really overwhelming at times, because the environment that I was in, especially in high school, was like, I was the trans kid in high school, and most of them didn't know that. But of course I had friends who were various flavors of LGBT that I interacted with pretty regularly, but being able to find people who had like really similar experiences to me was something that I've never had like in a face-to-face setting. So it was a pleasant surprise.
So get my questions together here. So my next question is, do you know of any sexual health resources on campus?
Yes. health promotion and wellness. I've read up on their stuff a lot just because probably throughout the last 6 months I've been going through a lot of stuff like interpersonally with relationships and my identity and stuff. So like I've been visiting the website and like looking at like, oh, what kind of things do they offer, and I've used some of their services. I know that they also do like the cooking demos. That's completely different, but done that. They're a really great resource. Everybody that I've encountered who works there is very, very pleasant and nice. And this may also be a little bit of a stretch as far as including it in that like category, but I do also use the psychological services on campus. And I think one time, I don't know. But I've also used like the clinics on campus and been tested, and it's all very accessible generally. I mean, physically, very easy to get to. Booking, can't really speak to.
I don't really have like firsthand experience with a lot of the like resources on campus, but I know that they're here because either I've had both people like who work there, either I've just talked to them because like we were friends, or they've come in specifically like to my workplace to announce like, hey, by the way, we're here, and then like kind of educate us on that. And then I've also just seen stuff online, like when I've looked into it myself. But I'm aware that we have different spots on campus for it.
Yeah. And then do you all feel that the resources that are present are fully meeting your needs, or even like the needs of the students in general on the campus?
I personally can't speak to like my exact needs, but I mean, just because again I haven't been myself, but I haven't explicitly heard anybody say that they've gone and that they were not satisfied, I think. But it also hasn't been like a great conversation topic or like a popular one, so yeah. I'm not really sure.
Myself and another good friend of mine have used Health Promotion Wellness for like their services, and I have nothing bad to say about what they do offer. I think that there's a really wide variety of like really important educational things beyond just sexual health. It's also like safe substance use with like alcohol, and also like dietitians and cooking demos and all of these really helpful things that are like really integral to like entering the world as a full-fledged adult. That and like the actual medical things that are available, I think are really, really good, especially because of the university's relationship to nearby hospitals. And like, of course, there's the Women's Resource Center, which is also really important, and the LGBTQRC, of course. I would say that the combination of all of those, as well as just the campus community in general, creates something that, if you choose to utilize it, makes you feel really safe. Thank you.
And then my final question is, if you all don't mind, like sharing some of your experiences, and then how has those experiences shaped your understanding of identity?
By experiences, do you just mean like anything in general?
Yeah, you can tell us anything that you think has shaped your understanding of identity.
Gotcha.
So I do see that the question says specifically for like a marginalized community, so maybe back it up.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, I guess in a way, I think my experience growing up, like as the black guy, you know, for a lot of it, I was just kind of like, I already had a lot of issues trying to figure out where exactly I was and like where I stood, just because growing up black, it was already one thing of like, I'm in a predominantly white area, so a lot of people are like pushing me in one direction or saying that like I should be this, or saying like, oh yeah, no, you're not this, you're more like this. So that was already a lot kind of having to deal with. But I think that the stereotypes of either like the standard black man or like a whitewashed black man, I think that a lot of that ended up like really weighing down on me. And I think that in combination with me being non-binary, I think it kind of led to me feeling completely alienated, because it was like I didn't just feel out of place being like black or being whitewashed black, because male was so integral to both of those groups that I just didn't really know like where exactly I actually was. But I think that growing up and then not only seeing other people like me on the side of, again, just being black, but I think being non-binary while black, I think that that kind of helped me discover more of like myself, in the sense of like, okay, one, I'm not crazy, and then two, I know that I actually like can be this thing. You know, it's not like I'm not too black to be non-binary. You know, like that's something that I can actually do.
I would say for me, something that was really just like shaping was how jarring it felt existing as like a trans person between high school and college, just because I socially transitioned right before I entered high school, and so it was really only the people that were coming with me from middle school, from that cohort of students specifically, that knew that I was trans. So it was probably like an eighth of the entire student body, and so the entire 4 years that I was there, I was more or less stealth, which is like when you're trans and other people don't know. So there was constant fear because, unfortunately, in certain classrooms, conversations would go into a way that would get very homophobic and very transphobic very fast. And so I would be put into situations where like I'm scared because I can't say anything. Things like that. And then it would be like I can't exist as trans first before I'm just like whatever else it is that I am in that given moment. Whereas existing in college, living with other trans people, it's like I can just talk about whatever related to my identity and my experiences, and it's just like a common understanding between people. And even the fact of like I can introduce myself and my pronouns are included in that, something that I'm not used to at all, because the spaces that I was in before college were not like that at all. And it was just kind of like a, I'm what you see me as, and if you see me as something bad, that's fine, I guess. And so it's a lot nicer now.
Okay, so I'll do the last topic, or like a few questions. I would say, how do you two feel that diversity is represented on campus and then in your academic environment specifically? And what would you say is missing, if there is anything that you can think of?
I'll go ahead and say I think that it's good, or at least we're trying to be good on campus, because, you know, it's like not only is there the LGBTQ Resource Center, but there are also just other resource centers in general that have to deal with diversity and like different identities and different communities. So I think that as like, you know, on the more professional side of things, I feel like this campus or this school does try to have stuff. But I mean, speaking to others in general, I feel like almost just like a complete 50-50, where you'll hear somebody talk about how like their classmates or like just the environment that they're in is like surprisingly very accepting, or the complete opposite, where it's, you know, you see people that are very much so not accepting. But I think that I guess I would say that I feel like we're better than other campuses, because I have a friend of mine who, like, on a different campus in still in our state, he's told me about like the incredibly like hate-filled things that like he's gone through and that like people around him have been through, because of like different specifics with gender, with not just gender identity, but just like identity in general. But I think that here I haven't necessarily, me personally again, I haven't necessarily felt or firsthand experienced any significant large issues with diversity, I think, but that's my end of it.
I would say that just from my point of view, and I do acknowledge that it may be a little bit skewed because I am in a social science, which does tend to have a little bit more variety among the student body than, say, like a more business-oriented field. Not to say that that's still accurate. I think that maybe like 5 or 10 years ago, it was a lot more unilateral, I guess, than it is now. But even so, I think that the opinions that you come across on campus do depend on the space that you exist in. But for the most part, I think that if there are people that aren't accepting per se, they are definitely tolerant, and that makes it safe. And there are a lot of resources that we do have access to that guarantee safety in a way, not just like the community centers, but also all the RSOs that are available. There's a lot of different groups of people that you can get involved with, and there's a lot of open promotion for all of those things that speak to diversity in all sorts of ways, not just in the sense of like gender identity or sexual orientation, but also like your diversity in interests or your diversity in like where it is that you come from, what types of like music you like, all sorts of things. There's many, many places for you to get involved, and I think for that reason I would consider our campus very, very diverse.
How can allies best show their support and understanding for marginalized communities in a meaningful way?
I will always say that I think that the first step for anybody is just to listen. I feel like listening to like the people in your life that are actively trying to tell you their experiences and like the stuff that they've gone through, I feel like that is a good start, especially like if you feel as if you're an ally but you're just not very knowledgeable about like a certain community. The best way that you're going to be able to figure stuff out is like either you're just research in general, you know, and I think that if you have people around you who are trying to help educate you on certain things, I think the best thing that you can do is to listen. And ultimately, you know, it's like if you're listening and then you're like, wow, that sounds really stupid, I don't like that, then it's like, okay, that is fair, but I feel like you can, as an ally, you can kind of like take a moment to realize that if you aren't in the community, then there may be something that sounds stupid to you because it's different and not something that you are regularly familiar with, you know. So I think that stepping away from that situation and then, you know, the next step after listening is to like either put it in practice or just try and find out more, you know. I think that research goes a long way, and I think that a lot of people kind of ignore that because they think that everything that they see firsthand or just hear about is perfectly fine. But I think that being involved, listening, talking, and understanding or trying to understand, I think that that's good.
Definitely. I think that as far as like creating an image of like what a good ally is, I think that pop culture and media has done a pretty good job by doing their characterizations of like how to not be a good ally. And there are many, many examples of this across like television right now. But on top of that, I mean, to build off of like the whole listening thing, it's also the fact of like if somebody tells you who they are, you need to sit down and listen to them and believe them. And you need to, if you're feeling that your gut is reacting in a way that's telling you to like reject it, you need to fight that off, because that's not what's true to like that person, of course, because they're telling you who they are. You need to consciously know that if something's unfamiliar to me, I may be drawn to reject it because it is unfamiliar, but the fact is that I'm just afraid because I don't understand. Getting over that, being conscious of it, is the first step. The next step is just to not be afraid to ask questions, because I've encountered so many people who want to be allied, but they're so afraid of asking the wrong thing that they won't ask anything at all. I think that having a conversation with somebody who is trusting you with asking those questions and you in turn are like giving your full attention and vulnerability to ask these questions and being okay with maybe wording something wrong. I think that that's another good step. Building connections within the community that you want to get involved with, and asking questions and asking how you can be a good ally is how to be a good ally.
Okay. And then final question, what steps do you two think can be taken to promote greater understanding and respect for diversity, both within and then outside of educational settings?
I think within educational settings, I would say that, again, my answer from before, I feel like that kind of has something there, at least just like, I guess I was going to say listening, but I think what I mean rather is like, I feel like if the people in charge for educational areas are more willing to talk about these identities and also address them as something that's like legitimate, and just kind of like talk about the logistics of it rather than just kind of never talking about it or outright denying it. Because I know that when I was in school, the fact that like I had a teacher who would refer to a trans friend of mine with their given, or not their given name, with their their chosen name and their chosen pronouns, that to me and to other people probably was one of their first few experiences having somebody in a higher position from them in this educational field acknowledging like a different identity and just what that entails. And I think that that goes a long way. So I think that in educational facilities, I think that that goes far, and that would help. But I think outside of educational facilities, I think that discussion and communication just really goes a long way with everything. But
yeah, my sentiment towards that's somewhat on the same lines. I definitely think that as far as like preferred name and pronouns in like grade school, I think that there could be more protective barriers in place for kids who are wanting to utilize that. For example, an actual preferred name change thing being implemented to like a roster or something, because I've had experiences where at the beginning of each year, my counselor reaches out to all my teachers, let them know like, oh yeah, this student's trans, just make sure you write their name down as this and not that, because that's what the system shows, but that's not right. And then a substitute teacher comes along and I have to fight this person. But like, that is me. That's just what the name is. And then it's like, no, you're not that person. And then having to explain myself all of these times when I'm like going to the school nurse or when I'm being checked out of school. There could be more protective barriers in place, and I think that this school's system for preferred name is a great example of how easy it can be. Is that you would just have to access like a system and then see like, oh, this is the legal name, this is the preferred name, and that's all it is. That's one thing. Of course, like promoting those community spaces is also a huge deal. I think that while it's pretty accessible, it's not really widely advertised, and I think that is in some part due to like a safety thing or just having it be a discreet and safe area. But as far as like outside of education, I think that people should be encouraged to mind their business, and when they don't, be respectful about it. Because there's that whole thing of like, there's a gay couple out in public and people are staring at them. Things as simple as that, where it's like, y'all just need to stick to what you're doing, because what they're doing is normal, and we're not going to make progress until you just act normal about normal people being normal. That type of thing. And then of course, like encouraging people to seek out communities that have different perspectives and different identities, I think is really good. I think that the media should really try and stray away from portrayals of like groups of people that all look the same and all believe the same thing. I don't think that that's an accurate depiction of like what being a person is like. Because if you do anything, you're going to meet somebody who is going to disagree with you on something, or is going to have something that's different. That definitely for sure as well.
And yeah, one last thing before we end. Is there something that we missed or something that you want to speak more on?
I personally don't feel like there was anything that I should delve in more. So.
No, I mean, as far as the stuff on campus, I really only have good things to say.
Awesome. In that case, that's it. And thank you so much.
Thank you.